Do you like mass firepower? Do you like belt-fed machine guns? Do you like 50 BMGs? Do you like 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum revolvers? Do you like ounce and a quarter slugs? Because regular 12-gauge slugs are for sissies. Well, today's show is not for you, because today is like the opposite of mass firepower. Today, we're going to talk about single-shot 22s. The little deuce, but you only get one of them. One round of 22. We're going to talk about single-shot 22s today. Why? Because I got a request from a patron, and I appreciate the patrons. So, here we go. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, all manner of things, hunting the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to be your host today. First and foremost, I am a Christian, also been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life, military, law enforcement, private contractor, professional big game hunter, and guide. That's enough of the bio today, since it doesn't really play in a lot, don't need a lot of street cred, I reckon, to talk about single-shot 22s. That's what we're going to talk about today. I'm kind of torn. Should I talk about different models and then talk about the philosophy behind why, or should I talk about the why and then the different models? I think philosophy is probably a little bit more important, so let's do some single-shot 22 philosophy. What are they good for? Because we talked about they're way down there on the firepower scale, right? They're like at the very bottom. So, why? Well, number one, and I think the number one thing they're for, and the number one thing that I own one for, is for training. Training the fundamentals. I have a single-shot 22 with a peep sight. It is a great training tool. It makes you slow down. It makes you focus on the fundamentals. And I have a ton of guns. I got a Scar 17 riding behind me in the truck. I got all manner of guns. By God's grace and provision. But it's a great training tool, even if you have other guns. Going back to the basics. And what is more basic than a single-shot 22? Also, they are great for teaching new shooters. So like youth, they're inherently safe. You get one shot, right? You can literally hand them the round, watch them load it. So they're inherently safe for that reason. They're also very simple, which has its own advantages. If you're trying to teach somebody gun maintenance, how a gun works, that they're pretty simple, straightforward. They're a pretty simple machine. Also, another reason, perhaps survival. And no, I'm not saying that they're the best survival gun. I'm not even saying that a 22 is the best survival gun. And I'm certainly not saying that a single-shot 22 is a great survival gun. But you can kind of cheat. We often do here, if you've listened for any length of time, what's your one gun for the fecal matter hitting the fan, the peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan? What's your one grab-and-go long gun? Well, you can kind of cheat, because a lot of these 22s are really light. Some more than others. Some are not light. Obviously, like some of the Target models and stuff are pretty heavy. But you can get some really lightweight 22s, single-shot 22. So if you have your Scar 17 or your Mossberg 590 A1 or whatever your bug-out long gun of choice is, right? You could still have a single-shot 22 in your pack with 100 rounds or 200 rounds, 2 sleeves of CCI mini mags, right? And that's a pretty good thing to have. It doesn't weigh a whole lot for the amount of firepower that you get. And again, real basic, easy to maintain. Not a great defensive tool, right? But for hunting small game and stuff, it'll work. So if you don't want to waste the 308, or you want to actually eat what you shot and it's small, you probably don't want to go shooting that morning dove with your Scar 17 or with your M1A or whatever it is. But the single shot 22, no problem, right? Look back in the Depression when people were literally feeding themselves quite a bit with food that they took, and a lot of that was with 22s, and a lot of those from years gone by were the old single shot 22s. Not all, but a lot. So I think they have some merit there. And that's probably a good segue into some of the single-shot 22s. Some of the older ones from yesteryear, the real common ones, or the Remington, I think it's the Remington 514. There's probably some other sub-models. So the Remington 514, bolt-action single-shot, very well made, very good sights. And the Winchester Model 67, I think the Model 60, I just saw one of those. Anyway, there are probably more models than that, but the 67, I think, is one of the big ones. But single-shot, basic 22 good iron sights, right? Good iron sights, not like today's like hashtag #MeToo iron sights. I recently bought a 22, which I'll probably get into in another episode, and it was like those glowing fiber optic sights, which I got no problem with, especially on a handgun. But it's like it's like a hashtag #MeToo. I'm a sight. Just because you have a notch doesn't make you a good sight. You may technically be better than nothing, but these older 22s, because they were made for marksmen, actually have really good iron sights. So either the Remington or the Winchester, good old single-shot bolt actions, those are real cool. Also, Springfield, and I think this is the old Springfield, not the new, they took the name Springfield. I think there's some pretty old, I've seen them really old, really basic, like one screw and you take the stock off. Talk about simple. Talk about a, maybe not designed that way, but really easy takedown gun. Springfield single-shot 22s, and almost certainly many of the other companies at the time, like Sears made a lot of guns, a lot of 22s. I would be surprised if they didn't make a single-shot 22. Sears, Western Auto, people like that may have at different times and different models made 22s. I know in Canada the Coeys are big. I'm not in Canada. I don't live in Canada. Although I do live pretty close to the Canadian border, and I still hardly ever see it. I don't know if I've ever seen a Coey, but I hear they're big in Canada, and I think they made 22s, and they may or may not have made a single-shot 22. We're talking about the older ones. Also, some of the older ones, the H&R handy rifles in 22. Those are pretty cool as well. They don't make those anymore, but they did make quite a few of them for a long time. So if you want like a break-open, kind of like a break-open shotgun, but in 22, those exist. And my favorite single-shot 22, mine's actually a handgun. I wanted one ever since I was a kid. I got one years ago, trained with it. I actually broke it. I should send it back to Thompson Center. But it's a Thompson Center Contender. Get them in a single-shot handgun, which is what I have for, again, going back to the fundamentals, going back to the basics. And also single-shot rifles. So if you want like a really nice, well-made single-shot, there you go. They also, I believe, still make a single-shot, not they as in Thompson Center, but the gun industry. Winchester, I believe, makes the 1885. If you want a really classy, really elegant, beautiful, not cheap, but like exquisitely made, maybe heirloom quality, super fun gun to shoot, super affordable gun to shoot, maybe not to buy, but the Winchester Model 1885. Kind of looks like a little baby buffalo rifle in 22. Single shot on one of those falling actions. They're exquisitely beautiful guns, and I believe they're being made right now. So if you're looking for like an heirloom quality single shot 22, then that would be a pretty cool option. Also, there are several other companies that make single-shot 22s. A lot of these are made for youth. There is the Keystone. Keystone makes really good quality single-shot 22s. Although a single-shot is being generous, I would kind of call them half-shot. Because on a lot of single-shots, you just put in the round and push the bolt forward and you're ready to go. You get one shot and you eject the round and put another round in and fire. With the Keystones, you have to work the bolt forward and then cock. I guess it would technically be a striker. So you actually pull back the back part of the bolt to make it fire. So you have to do two different things, two different actions of the bolt to get one shot. So again, I might call that a half shot because you can't just work the bolt and fire around, work the bolt and fire around. So if you want a really, really slow rate of fire, the Keystones. But again, that could be good. If you're prone to frustration and you need to relax and focus on the fundamentals, it might be a good self-moderator there. Also, teaching new kids, right? It's easy to look down and tell whether they if that gun's ready to fire or not. And also, you can hand them around and have the round in the gun so they can be walking around. If you're doing some small game hunting, you can have them walking around with a round in the gun, because that can be hard to do when you're excited for a little kid, especially with gloves and stuff on. You could have a round in the gun, but it still is not ready to fire. They have to actually cock the back of the, again, I guess it would be a striker on the back of the bolt to actually have the gun fire. So that has some advantages, even slower than a single shot, or most traditional single shots. So that's an option. The Keystones, they make some really cool, they make a bunch of different models. And then the single shot bolt action that I have is a Savage Rascal. It's really accurate. It's a great gun. It doesn't have to work the bolt. It basically, you have to work the bolt. You don't have to cock the bolt after you close it. So it's a much faster rate of fire, which is why I went with that over the Keystone, because I do hunt and do things with it. In fact, like many of these, it'll shoot to 22 CB caps and 22 shorts, which are crazy quiet. Talk about really quiet. So if you just happen to have like a raccoon in your yard, you might, they're handy for that. But that's another advantage I probably should have mentioned in the first part of the episode. But the Savage Rascal, they make one. So it's a good topic. I think they have their place. Obviously, if it's like any kind of actual, you want to put, it would be my first choice for a hunting rifle, unless I was doing it to make it more challenging. Like back when I lived in Arizona and I was doing a lot of small game hunting, because it's hard to get tags there, I wanted to do kind of this experiment to see which was a better actual putting meat on the table, not just theoretical. So I got a single shot break open 12 gauge and a single shot 22, and went out several times to see which one was actually better for putting meat on the table. That said, that was for that experiment. If I'm actually going out to hunt, even with a bolt action 22, I would get not a single shot. There's the argument, like, what if you break or lose a magazine or whatever? Then you still have a single shot, right? If you lose your magazine, you can still load one round in. And I've never seen somebody break a tube or bend a tube, if you're talking about a tube feed, to the point where it wouldn't work at all. I'm sure it's happened at some point in history, but I've never seen it, because it's kind of under the barrel. That's kind of the point, is fairly protected. You're probably going to break something else before you break it. It's a metal tube. So, again, if we're talking about like hunting to put meat on the table, a single shot 22 wouldn't be my first choice. If it was a backup gun like we talked about, because it's super lightweight and super simple, okay. If it was going to be my one, and I'm not the guy that tells you to grab a 22 and run out into the apocalypse, but if it was going to be a 22, I would want it to be semi-auto, almost certainly, because if you need to use it for defense. 22 is not great for defense, but 10 of them real quick is a lot better than one. So that's just simple survival math there. Can't argue with science. But they have their place. They have their place especially for training, and they have their place for teaching new shooters. And if you want a challenge, right? If you want to make it harder to hunt, if you want to make it harder to go out and train, which again has its purpose sometimes. Single shot 22s, I thought a pretty cool topic. Anyway, with that, the tactical tip of the day. A lot of guys gravitate towards the tactical stuff, and I get it. I like tactical stuff. I like guns. I like knives. I was just looking at knives, just kind of getting out a break from the road trip, walking around, checking out different knives. But that's not all there is. I've probably talked about before, but I don't know if you've heard it, practicing your knot tying. You should have a couple of go-to knots. Real basic knots, simple lashing techniques, things like that. Once you have those knots, here's a tactical tip. Practice them without looking. Practice them in the dark, or practice them without looking down. Just tying the knots. Automaticity. Just practice them. Just go through the motions without even looking. And make sure you got those knots down pat. One, it'll reinforce it so you learn it tactically instead of just visually. Also, there may be a time where you don't want light, where you need to tie a knot, and you don't want to make any light, or you simply don't have or can't see. So anyway, once you've got your knots down, just like, in the military, when you learn to disassemble and reassemble an M16, you do it blindfolded. You do it with your eyes closed. Just kind of reinforces how well you can do it, and the fact that you can do it blindfolded just shows how well you can do it. Now, obviously, if you have to do it in an emergency, use your eyes if you can, but if it's dark and you can't, you can still field strip that weapon and put it back together. Same with knots. It's a real practical skill, right? You should be able to tie a bowline in the dark, and a couple of other go-to knots. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We often, I think many Christians quote, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Right before that it says, you shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. We often think wrongly today, because I think a lot of Christians get way too caught up in trying to fit in today's culture. You're not called to fit in today's culture. Today's culture is mostly garbage, so don't try and fit in. The word holy literally means set apart, to be different. So don't be afraid to be different. Will you be persecuted? Yes. Does the nail that sticks up get hammered down? Yup. Be a tough nail. But here's the thing. A lot of times in today's culture, people will say, oh, just live your best life, which is garbage. You live the life God tells you to live, not the life that you want to live. You stopped living for you and you gave your life to Christ, or at least you should have. Die to self, right? Dying to self daily. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. Love your neighbor as yourself doesn't mean letting somebody that you love do whatever they want, because often people will do things that are really bad for them. You can't just say, well, I love that person, so I'm going to let them do whatever they want. That's a garbage, cop-out, weak, wet noodle answer. Have a backbone. Like if your best friend, your brother, is shooting up heroin, you're like, oh, hey, man, good for you. Live your best life. No, you're like, hey, man, you're messing up your life. You are seriously messing up. If your friend's committing adultery, you're not like, oh, yeah, well, good for you. You guys are in love. No, you say, that is messed up. That is wrong. It is a sin. It is a dreadful, horrible thing. Stop doing that. That is loving. Sometimes loving means rebuking. And I think we get that wrong in today's culture. Just do whatever you want, whatever you feel, I'm here for you. You can be there for them and still smack them in the face metaphorically and say, hey, you're messing up. It's not loving to be weak and spineless to let somebody do whatever they want because they might resent you for it. Would you rather them resent you and be saved from that awful repercussions of that sin? Or would you rather just not make any waves? Right? Stand up and be a man. And likely many people will think of the verse, like he was without sin, cast the first stone. I'm not talking about stoning somebody to death. And many people will think about the verse where Jesus says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye but not the plank in your own eye? But how does he continue? He says, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So yeah, work on getting the sin out of your own life first, but don't just let your brother continue in sin. The law was given for our good. Those restrictions are given because it's good for us. It hurts us when we sin. It hurts us when we commit adultery. It hurts us when we do whatever X, Y, and Z sin, whatever somebody's favorite sin is. It's bad for them. If you love them, help them, rebuke them, even if they resent you for it. Would you rather them resent you, again, and live and be saved and have a better life? Or would you rather them just not be upset with you at all and perish? Which one of those is actually loving versus what a lot of people today think love is? Love is not whatever you want it to be. Love is not with whomever you want it to be, whenever you want it to be, whatever you want it to be. God says what love is because God is love. He dictates how to love him and how to love our neighbor. That's right. That's the sum of all the commandments. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Right? That's the summation. But all the other commandments tell us how to do that. Harlotry with idols, having idols, that's not loving God. Committing adultery is not loving your neighbor. Coveting what your neighbor has is not good for you. That's why God says don't do it. He is the author of love. He is love. God is love. So love the way that he tells us to love, not what you think love should be, because you don't decide what love is. God does. Anyway, with that, I appreciate you listening, and have a blessed day.